So look, the only danger in asking a TV writer about a scene that was really cool that they dug that was never shot is that sometimes their answer isn't about a scene, but rather an entire episode that once you hear about it, it's so freaking cool that you can't stop thinking about it for a little while. And that is my current problem. But hey, today I'm going to pass that problem right along to you. And then it's not just my problem, it's our problem. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. And folks, yeah, it's going to be a problem for all of us because today's guest, Dan Gilroy, told me about an entire draft of a script for Andor Season 2 that he wrote that just, they had to cut it. I get it. They couldn't have done it. You'll hear why. And we even talk about it in the next episode because it's too cool. I think it should be published, but whatever. We probably will never see it. But it was fun to talk about it today. And just to give you a hint, it's about K2SO. But look, our guest is Dan Gilroy. Yes, brother of Tony. And it's a blast to have him back in the podcast. It's always fun to chat with Dan about screenwriting because he has so many unique insights. And of course, he was very forthcoming about his creative process. So I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. We turned 13 this year, and we couldn't have done it without you. If you've never read us, you could check us out at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory, and there's a whole free issue for you to read. And if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a one-year subscription. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could see all these Zoomcasts. That's right, you could see Dan and I talking. It would really mean a lot to me to have you consider supporting independent entertainment journalism, so thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with screenwriter Dan Gilroy about Andor Season 2, Episodes 7 through 9, which you could watch right now on Disney+. Great to see you. How you doing, man?
I'm doing so well. How you doing?
Good. You know, I guess the easiest place to start, it's always interesting to hear what you learned from your last film, which to my knowledge was 2019's Velvet Buzzsaw. So if anything, what would you say was your biggest takeaway lesson?
I learned a massive lesson on Velvet Buzzsaw, and that is that mixing horror and comedy is not as easy as it looks. I went into that thinking, horror and comedy go hand in hand. This can't be that difficult. And in post, we realized that it's a much finer road. We'd spent a lot more time in post than any other movie I did. My brother John, who's a producer on this and cut this, it was tough. It was really hard finding because it's so difficult. It's like how deep do you go into the horror? How funny does it get? What are you anchored to? After that film, I have great respect for people who mix any two genres at all. I never mixed two genres together like that. And I just went into it blithely ignorant, thinking this is just going to be so much fun. And it was fun, but it was tough. It was really hard.
It's a balancing act. It's being on a tightrope to see if you could walk that perfect balance between comedy and horror. And it was fun because I remember seeing it with an audience and people were absolutely not sure what to make of it at first. But then it hit its groove because you did find your tone.
Yeah, we found it.
It was a wild and crazy film. So
it's a wild and crazy film. It's beloved by people in the art world because it is actually fairly accurate. So I get the people who work in the art world, God help them. They come on and go, you can't believe how real this is.
Well, I think a good place to start would be about working with your brothers, about working with Tony and John. Did you guys growing up make films together? Did you ever do anything like that? Or is it really something you grew into as adults?
We grew into it as adults. I mean, we played around with an 8mm camera, nothing Spielberg-like. I made a couple of silly ones. We were all individually into our own thing. We grew up in upstate New York, very kind of rural when we grew up. Our parents were the opposite of helicopter parents. There was very few things that we weren't doing or getting into trouble for. So we kind of just became resilient on our own. Tony went off. Tony was going to be a rock star. Tony's an incredible musician. People don't know that about him.
Really? What's he play?
He's good at guitar. He's probably as good a guitar player as he is a writer. I mean, he used to be. I don't know if he practices anymore.
Wow.
He was a phenomenal guitar player. He came very close to making it, actually. Johnny was a bartender in New York, and I worked at Variety newspaper as a reviewer and a film reporter. And then we both all just started going our own way into the movies. Tony and I started writing together, wrote a couple things together. We both got jobs, and we sort of split up organically. Johnny started becoming an editor. And then we all met back up, 15 years later on various projects and started working together. We're very close. We're very lucky. I know people who don't get along with their siblings. I feel, I'm sure there's reasons they don't get along with their siblings, but I'm very happy that I get along with my siblings. We talk every other day usually about the business, something we're doing or something that somebody else is doing.
What was your greatest moments that you remember from Andor season 1?
My greatest moments in season 1 and season 2 were both the writer's room, because the writer's room, the first season was essentially Tony, me, and Bo Willimon, who did House of Cards, which was just like, oh my God, I love Bo, I love Tony. Tony came into it with a very strong document, a roadmap of what season 1 was, but we were hammering a lot of things out. We went through that in 5 days, 6 days, working like 10 hours a day. As you can probably tell, I talk really fast, Tony talks really fast, Bo maybe speaks faster than we do, and it just was this like rapid fire, like bulldozing through the thing and just going boom, boom. And it was just like, I love that. And I don't usually work with other writers. I never work with other writers.
Is that an experience that says to you that you want to try co-writing, more often again? Not just...
I want to do it with people who have the same work ethic that they do. I mean, I'm being totally honest. Tony and Johnny and I'm probably Bo, I am a complete workaholic. And I'm hell to work with if you're not a workaholic. Not that I'm abusive or anything like that. It's just, if there's a void or a hole in a story, I will fill it, and it's like, it can, and so some people, in the past I've worked with, there's no bad ideas in this room, let's not say no too quickly. And I'm like, oh my God, that's not how I work. There are bad ideas. And I say no all the time. Tony and Bo and I were saying no to each other constantly.
I want to talk about that dynamic for a second. Do you remember anything just in season 1 that was like an idea that persisted for a few moments that then was kind of argued away, that was never shot, never scripted, but was fun for like a day or two because you only had 5 or 6 days?
God, there was one point that Tony got hung up on the first or second episode, and he kept on insisting it was going to work. Tony came in and it was this thing. It had an emotional component to it. It was very ephemeral. This was going to carry through like 4 or 5 episodes. And Bo and I are just destroying him. This just absolutely doesn't work on any level. You cannot do this. And just when we thought we put it to bed, 2 hours later, Tony would bring it back up. I can't remember what it was. That was fun. I would just remember a lot of like we would hit an impasse. The bank robbery. How are they going to get into Aldani? There's only 5 of them. What's going to happen? So you start reaching your bag of tricks. One of us came up with, they'll take like a bank robbery here. Like they'll take the manager hostage, and then that'll become like how they'll do it. Oh yeah, we'll do the bank robbery. So like that took probably we overcame that problem in like 90 seconds. That's how fast we were going. We literally go like, how are they going to break into Aldani? Beep, 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 beep. Oh, they'll take that manager hostage. Let's just keep going.
Right.
I mean, there was not a lot of looking back.
When you guys are moving so fast, Tony told me that sometimes there's somebody in the room kind of transcribing what you're saying. Is that like a breakdown that you like then get the next day before you return to work so you could see where you are and pick back up? Because I could see good ideas even being lost when you're moving so fast.
So in that first season, Tom Bissell came in the second season, but the first season you're talking about now, it's just the 3 of us. Tony and I would be at the table. There was about a half a dozen or more Star Wars people there. Luke was there, the production designer. Zana was there, the producer. There was a lot of people in the room.
Absolutely.
They're not really speaking too much. We're talking. I don't like to use other people's notes. I am typing fanatically while I'm discussing. As somebody's saying something, I am coming up with other ideas. So I'm having my own thing. So when I'm done at the end of a day, I'll have 20 pages of typo-ridden notes that I've just banged out. And then I don't even look at what the other person wrote because I know what was relevant that I discussed. Bo's got like 8 whiteboards because he ran House of Cards.
Right.
He's very used to it. So Tony and I, we would all be riffing. He was almost like a drummer-singer because he's not only coming up with ideas, but he's writing everything on the whiteboards as we're going. So at the end of the day, you got a photograph of the whiteboard, and then you got the handwritten notes, and then we just got right back into it. It was a blast. In the second season, the same thing, man. Tom was in there. It was great. He was helping out. It was.
We're going to get to it. Is there anything that you remember that was like a creative challenge of one of the 3 episodes that I think you wrote in the first season that was something that you really kind of were a little stuck on? It took a little time because from what Tony told me, you have about 6 weeks to get. It wasn't clear if it was 1 script or all 3 scripts done in those 6 weeks.
Probably closer to all 3, maybe. I don't know. It was going very quickly. Well, yeah, I mean, look, once you come up with the idea that they're going to take the manager hostage, okay, great. But then it's like, okay, what's the choreography? Because people, so I'm on the phone for the next 5 days with Zana and Tony and Luke, the production designer, and they're coming to me because every night I'm staying up till 4 a.m. and I'm laying out how I see the choreography. So I'm literally going like, okay, the commandant lives over here, and then there's about a 300-yard walk, and the dam looks like this, and then there's a guard tower. Because it's one thing to write a script, and then over a period of years, a production designer comes in and goes, oh, let's think about this, but this has to tie in. So there was a lot of incredible detail. What's the ship look like? Little minor things. I always wanted when they got the ship, I always wanted to go backwards and then go forwards. It was like a minor note. There was things that I wanted to have happen. I wanted them to jump on the ship and not walk in. It was a lot of detail-oriented stuff like that. Other than that, it was a fairly normal writing process because we knew what the characters were. Because we were etching the characters in the room. So like the Aldani raid, we come up with the idea that they're going to take the manager hostage, the bank manager. So we're going like, okay, who's the bank? Oh, he's the colonel. He's the commandant. So we're going, what do you call him? He's the commandant. This is how we're coming up with it. He's the commandant. He runs this base. So then you think, well, what is he like? And you're going like, well, he's probably like a colonial asshole. He's probably one of those people who fucking looks down on the people here. So now you start to get an image of what he is. And, that was great. The actor who played that part, he just couldn't have been more off-putting about how he looked at the people who lived on Aldani and how he thought they were just like lower life forms, classic colonial mentality. So then you're starting to fill these characters in. So that became a more standard writing job. But the pace of doing the blocking and, the production design on Andor, I think, is just as good as anything I've ever seen.
It's amazing. I mean, it's
Luke
beautiful.
Hall, I believe, who did Chernobyl, phenomenal.
He's great. I mean, and he really knocked it out of the park. I mean, it's funny because in writer's circles, sometimes it's debated as to how much detail you should have in your script because they said it sometimes impedes directors. But Tony, and from what he and I have talked about, he really implores what I would describe as the Hitchcockian method, in which he works out every single thing he can so that it doesn't matter. Like, as he told me, he doesn't need a writer on set because it's so well mapped out that everybody knows exactly where they're going and the director still has the freedom that they need. So I'm curious, when it comes to mapping things out, are you writing your action beat by beat?
Step by step, beat by beat. As a director myself, I will never tell somebody medium, wide, close up. I won't give them that kind of direction. And I'm not a big one on giving parenthetical directions to the actors. I'm married to an actor, and she hates it. And I don't like to tell an actor how they should be feeling, but I will give, beat by beat. I mean, if they move in a room and they touch something, I'm writing that. I should say, as I'm saying, I'm writing, there was no scripts in season 1 or season 2 that Tony didn't come in behind us, which he needed to do because he was the consistent voice of everything, shape everything, conform it, improve it, edit it. I don't want anybody to get the impression that I or Bo or Tom were ever working in a vacuum. We weren't. We were working for a showrunner who was taking what we were doing and conforming it to what it needed to be.
Absolutely. We've already interviewed Tony about it, and we're going to interview him again at the end of the season. Right. I guess I want to talk about your creative habit for a second.
Yeah.
When you sit down to write, obviously, because this is television, you would beat it out and outline.
Yeah.
How important is outlining to your process in general as a writer?
It was important to me when I started. My process of writing now is I go from one outline to another until finally I have a very large screen, very significantly large screen. I usually, when I'm writing, I have 4 documents up. One on the left is the roughest outline, or it's an outline, let's say dialogue, and then characterization, then this. And my last one over here is my script. And basically my process of writing now is my outlines just funnel into the script. All the specificity and outlines finally come in. And what I spend the most time working on when I'm on actually writing the script on this side of the screen is dialogue. I will agonize for a day over a line. What I don't have to do is think about when I get there. I don't think about, what's happening here and where are they going? This is a mistake that a lot of writers make. I mean, I'll harp this forever. People sit down too quickly to write something. It's the equivalent of like, hey man, go into Radio City Music Hall and do a stand-up comedy act tomorrow night. It takes a year to work up a comedy act. Oh, it does. It's like it takes a long time to outline all this stuff before you can finally go up. And what do you do when you're finally up in front of Radio City after a year? Now you can really do timing. And now you can really like vibe into everything. So when I'm finally writing the script, I've done my year prep to get into Radio City. The writing of the script is far and away the most glamorous part of the job. It's like when people want to rush to it. People get up in the morning and go like, I got to write exterior, interior. And then there's like 50,000 things that you don't know are going on. To me, the most important thing always has been sort of character and dialogue. So I can really jam on my character and dialogue once I know everything that's going on. So outlines are sort of like weird versions of my script, sort of what they finally become. Very
and that's great that you have so much space on the screens dedicated to character, to dialogue, to your outline, like so that you're looking at everything at once.
When we started the writer's room in season 1 and season 2, what he dropped on the table was probably 70 to 80 pages of outline. I mean, it was, highly, highly, highly detailed. We were just going, is this the best thing? Can we change this? Can we do that?
Now, you're a workaholic, self-described. When you sit down to write, do you give yourself a certain page count to hit each day or a certain amount of hours that you want to hit?
It's the same number of hours every day. I get up at 4 in the morning. I'm writing by 4:45. I write from 4:45 with lunch and maybe a nap in there till 6 o'clock at night, 7 days a week. I've been doing that for an ungodly number of years. Tony, I'm sure when he was working on this, was doing probably maybe more. My brother Johnny when he's editing and working on this is probably working similar hours. I question why I work so hard. I know I love it. And I think it's one of the things that I like to do, and people think I'm good at it. So I like getting enjoyment out of that. But one, if you're not working that hard, it's tough to make money in this business. I think if you don't work something resembling that hard as a writer, you're going to have a tough time unless you're really just so gifted that you can just knock them out. To create something like what Tony's done, I mean, Tony's incredibly gifted and talented, but it takes an enormous amount of time, thousands of hours.
Oh, it's taken years.
I mean, years. And so it's like you don't have a lot of time. You know, they don't give you a lot of time. So you have to forego everything that would normal people would consider to be pleasures. Weekends, hanging out, going to the beach, hanging out with friends, that's all goes out the window for me. I mean, unfortunately, I stay in touch with my friends. My family's the most important thing in my life.
I got to clarify something. Are you talking about when you're on assignment, like when you're writing an Andor like series of these 3 scripts, or are you talking about your life habit in general?
I write spec scripts in between assignments. So I actually generate a lot. And once I finish an assignment, I'm instantly back on a spec. So, you know, writing specs for me is a big part of what I do, that I like to do. You know, the three films I did were all specs, you know.
So look, podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could see these Zoomcasts. That's right. You could see Dan and I sitting here talking on Zoom. If you have not yet watched episodes 7 through 9 of season 2 of Andor, please press pause, go watch it in Disney Plus, and then come back because we're going to get into the spoilers. Something totally random because obviously you were breaking the whole season. We're in the spoilers now. But, you know, in the apartment on Coruscant, there's this little blinking light that they could see in the distance. And that's like their version of the bat signal, like when Luthen needs them. Yeah. And obviously you can't do anything as big and glorious as the bat signal or the whole city would see it. There would be nothing covert about it. But how did you decide on this little blinking light in the distance?
Oh,
there could have been so many other ideas.
That was a half an hour in the writer's room. We had many conversations about that because I think all Tony and Bo and I and Tom, we're all conversing with like Le Carre and Spycraft. And, you know, we're all going, I'm going like, well, you know, there, like they leave a chalk mark on a bench when they walk by. And well, what are the other ways? Like, you know, they go into a bookstore and somebody like has left something in a book. We're going back and forth and it was just getting too wonky. I think Tony was the one who finally said it's a blinking light. And we were going like the bat light, it's like a blinking light. Like how far away is it? Can you see it? And Tony's going, no, it's just going to be, we sort of like, he decided it and it was kind of like, okay, somebody else is going to figure out how that looks. And then we just moved on.
Yeah, it's just like a tiny light in the city landscape. I thought it was good. Like they could almost miss it is the problem. It's so.
I think I advocated for like there was a grocery store they would go to a store. I was advocating that there was like a chalk mark like on something, but I think that was too analog. I don't know.
Sure, that makes sense. Well, you know, look, the Force is obviously a huge part of Star Wars, and it's in your episode that we are introduced to the Force healer on Yavin 4 when Cassian is hanging out, and he has a reticence for sure about the Force in general, and he sees it as kind of wonky medicine in this case because it's a Force healer, and you know he's having this problem with a wound that hasn't exactly healed. Tell us about how you approach that because it's pretty important to kind of get into the Force for the first time here in this series.
I think the Force is hugely important to the franchise. I think I've always been a believer that the Force is something that needs to be represented. Tony always had in his head that in season 1 it would not be represented, but he always told us that in season 2 it would come in. Given the fact we don't dive in deep to the Force in season 1, I think it would have been very difficult in season 2 to just dive in fully and suddenly it's there and it's present. I think tonally it might have been difficult. So when Tony presented in his original outline how it was going to be broached, the topic, we all latched onto it. I particularly, as a fan of the Force, and I was like, I wanted to push that scene with the Force healer as far as possible. And also what was also critically important to me was that Bix, having witnessed it, became a believer herself. That was really important to me. That Bix, I think at the end, Bix there is something out there that I can't explain that is incredibly powerful, that is guiding a lot of what we're doing. I don't know where Diego lands on this, but when I was writing it, I was imagining that although it was an elliptical sort of introduction to the Force, it had an effect on him. I felt he was open at that point. You know why? And we actually talked about this in the room because we started to advocate why it should be in there. And well, would Cassian believe this or not? And we were all going like, so many phenomenally strange occurrences have happened to him. He must be now open to something saying there's an organized principle / element that's behind all this. And I think, I don't know if you've interviewed Diego, I'd actually be curious to know what he would say, but I would think Diego would say at that point, I mean, he's sensing his death. I mean, I think some part of him is sensing this is not going to go well. It's because he's watched too many people go the other way and his mortality is at stake and he's so many strange occurrences have happened, you know, running into Syril and Gorman and just the strange, like there was that and all these other things.
But when he meets the healer, it's interesting because like in your batch of episodes, he's definitely on his way wanting to take a break and get out.
Yeah.
So I mean, like it's interesting for it to come there. How did you arrive on the Force healer talking and defining him as a messenger?
That was in Tony's outline, and I was really glad he put it in there because that's pretty definitive, because she's saying something that I believe is true, that he's an apostle. He's not spreading the word, he's spreading the revolution that's going to turn into the war. But look, you study the Bible, so many of the apostles had no belief whatsoever in anything that was going on. They were along for the ride, many of the apostles. I mean, a couple of them that were too zealous, but many of the apostles were just, I'll betray him. This is crazy. I don't want to be part of what's going on. This is dangerous. So I always saw him as an apostle. I think just like in the Bible, after Jesus rises, in that story, a lot of the apostles became true believers after that. I always imagined when I was writing the scene that when Cassian encounters the faith healer, that afterward it lands with him. And I believe when he's on the beach dying, I believe somewhere in his head, he's not imagining this as death. He's imagining this as some sort of continuation.
Well, it's interesting because, they talk about on the show that he needs to be in a special place. And, obviously we know where that is because it's at the end of Rogue One. He needs to deliver what he did to basically give the Rebel Alliance a chance. Bix has this different interpretation of it. And she gets kind of spooked, as we see, in which she decides that because she's so inspired by what the Force healer had to say, that she could only get in Cassian's way. And so she abandons him, which is very interesting and unexpected because you see her as a fighter, especially coming into this batch of 3 episodes because, she just enacted vengeance on Dr. Gorsh. And so, she's kind of back on her own again.
So that was in the outline. Yeah. However, I blew my deadline on that episode because I was taking so long on it because I didn't want to let it go. The reason I didn't want to let it go was because I was working on that scene. The scene with the concept of, and I remember getting to the scene in the bedroom, and I hope the line is still in there. Like he says, like finally, there's nothing more important than this. Like I'm with you. There's nothing more important than this. And she doesn't respond. I hope that's still in there. And then the next day she leaves the tape. As soon as he says that, as I was writing, I thought he sealed his death warrant with this relationship because Bix does not believe that. Bix believes there is something far more important than the two of them. And so that's the line to me that she decided right there, I have to kill this relationship because I am in the way. It touched on in the writer's room. I don't remember if I really told Tony I was going to do it, but I sent it to Tony. Finally got the draft in. I was late. And Tony was really into it. Tony was like, this is great. And because she leaves the message for him. And I was going like, yeah, because that was not been decided in the writer's room. Actually, in the writer's room, it was going to be like they were going to encounter each other and have a conversation. I was going like, I just can't write that. It's just too tragic. It's more tragic the other way. I mean, of all the sacrifices in both seasons, Bix's sacrifice to that relationship is fairly high up. I mean, she's killing something that's obviously everything to her. She's doing it for the cause,
It was a good way to add drama in there. It could have been a little, too pat if they had a conversation like what you said. As Tony and I talked about, obviously Cassian is driven by the memory of his sister and Bix, and he's always trying to save people. He doesn't always get the results that he wants, which I think keeps driving him again and again and again. So she almost is adding fuel to his fire because that he's not going to just be there licking his wounds in a corner, crying about how Bix left him. The claim is that she has said the same thing he did, which is what a lot of characters say is like, oh, when this is over, we'll have time. And when you're in, a crazy situation, you have no idea when it's going to be over or if you're going to live through it being over. So, I mean, she said the right thing to say. I thought it was a really good scene.
She's whistling in the dark when she says that. I think all of them know it's becoming too real for all of them. They're all going to pay a price like all revolutionaries ultimately do.
You were talking about your love for dialogue. I think one of the greatest lines that ended up in there, and this could have been a Tony polish. I don't know if it came from you or not, but as we're going to start examining Gorman and what goes on, when Partagas is kind of assessing it and talking to Dedra, he basically just says, "Bad luck, Gorman."
That's Tony. That's Tony. Yeah.
That is a great Tony line.
I probably had 3 or 4 sentences that he reduced to bad luck and made it better.
Do you think that happens a lot with dialogue in which you write the long version and you try and pare it down over and over? Because that's a skill that I see Tony definitely having, of paring things down to just 1 or 2 sentences.
It's a critical skill for any writer or director. I mean, not only that, I think ultimately the best version is where somebody writes 4 pages of dialogue and somebody cuts all the dialogue out and just makes it a visual something. And you don't even need the dialogue anymore. We learned, Bill Goldman was a friend of our family. We were very blessed to spend a lot of time with him. The rules that our father and Bill worked on, One of them certainly was compression. Everything is never let the audience get ahead of you. Never bore them as much as possible. Compress everything. Start scenes late. Start dialogue minimal. You know, if you can say it in one word instead of 800, yes, that's the rule that I think takes you very far. I really do.
Well, it's interesting. Talk about the audience getting ahead of someone. You know, Syril is kind of behind us because we know that there's bigger things happening on Gorman, and he's kind of just a puppet in between. And Dedra tries to warn him. You know, she just says, like, look, follow your orders. We're going to be greatly rewarded at the end of this. Just trust me. You don't need to know everything. And I want to talk about that kind of character change for Syril, because by having a season where you are zapping forward a year at a time, you don't get to see all the changes that these characters are going through, but we could do the math in our heads. So what could you tell us about Syril's arc, in which he's an infiltrator for sure with the Gorman front, but he is starting to sympathize with them?
I think Tony probably had the seeds of that or more in the outline, and that's something we hit really hard in the writer's room. You tie Syril into the relationship with Dedra. So Dedra says point blank to Edie over that horrendous dinner, she grew up in basically like an orphanage. So I think Tony and I and Bo and Tom, I think we all like to imagine that everything doesn't have to be explained. The audience makes connections. So as soon as Dedra says she grew up under the Empire, she now is one of the henchmen of the Empire, you can sort of connect going, oh, it's kind of like Stockholm Syndrome. She became, and she's a self-loathing whatever person. But then we compared that to Syril, because now we're talking about Syril. And we were very much in the writer's room going, well, Cyril's not like that at all. What is Syril? Cyril's ultimately a bureaucrat who wants to please, who got no love. His father was obviously non-existent. Edie never gave him anything resembling affection or positive reinforcement. So what does he want? He wants to pat on the head. When he says after party guest pats him on the head, as the guys say. However, but that's not enough to stop him from making observations about what he sees. And what he sees on Gorman is, this thing I'm working for is not what I thought I was working for. That's a really interesting character in a world that's becoming autocratic, because there are people who make bargains with authority that's a dangerous authority, and some will stay with it and not have a question, but there will definitely be some who will go, this is much worse or different than I thought it was going to be. I'm having second doubts about this. And I think he's representative of a group of people who get caught up in a system and they don't do it for philosophical reasons. Dedra's doing it for some strange philosophical reason. She believes in the Empire. Syril has no philosophical belief in it. Syril has emotional need, which it's sort of supplying, but that does not blind him from seeing things.
Well, I've been thinking about it a lot. Would you say that filling in the blanks here would be that Dedra's indoctrinated since youth? So she believes in all the ideals of the Empire. She grew up in the Empire, but we do see some signs of hesitation with her occasionally. But Syril is always looking for that positive reinforcement, and having a whole group that's dependent on him and is impressed with the material that he is feeding them, even though he's betraying them, they don't know it yet. It's the positive reinforcement. It's like he's finally found a clique that he could hang with, and they all really like him.
We were thinking that in the writer's room, thinking while I was writing it. Absolutely. He's not hanging out with this group of people going like, I despise you secretly. I think not only is he waking up to what the Empire is really about, but he's waking up to exactly what you said, that I can have relationships with people who are very un-Empire-like, and I'm getting satisfaction out of it. Look, I mean, people get involved in many causes just purely on the basis of relationships. You know, I think relationships probably are far more a driver for people getting involved in stuff than even the philosophy of it.
Technically, Syril started as a corporate cop, and he's just found a bureaucracy that he could move up through, and he felt like, okay, this is the path for me. But now he's seeing that really the side that he was on might not be so good, and they're clearly not. And so I thought that was interesting. And so as he's doing his arc, at one point, as the Gorman massacre is about to take place, he's whisked away into a safe room. He kind of looks around and just feels out of place, and he wants to escape and get out of there. And so at that point, he's already had this confrontation with Dedra. Talk about that scene where he literally confronts her and realizes that not only he's been played, but it doesn't even matter in her mind, because literally they have one mission to do. They're going to leave the planet behind, and they'll never have to think about it again, at least in her mind.
His emotional need is absolutely running head on into her autocratic unwavering belief that the Empire is right. He's coming to her with a need. Look, I'm telling you something, and we're important, and this is and she's not giving that back to him in any way. So not only is he dealing with the realization that he's been played, he's finding out a lot of things at that moment. I've been played, an atrocity is about to happen. I think he's definitely reacting against this is wrong. This is like this is something that really you get that sense from him. So you're waking up to the character. The character is revealing to you that the emotional component of his life is far more important than even what's going on outside. And actually, there is a morality to him. So, she puts him down in that room for a reason. Obviously, he gets out, but her reaction is crushing to him. I mean, I always love that after Party Guys gives him the compliment. He goes, "This is the best day of my life." One little word is all it took. So you can imagine what Dedra's opinion of him would be, or her non-reaction to what's going on. Her non-reaction to his emotional state, how an extremist he is over what's going on. He's not getting it back from her, and she's just not acknowledging it.
He makes a comment to her when he's asking about the mining and what's going on with the planet, and he's like, "Tell me the mining's a rumor and I'll throw you out the window." Like he is furious. He's over the top. And so he's reached his boiling point. But it's interesting because when he comes back out and he goes to join the protesters, he runs into Rylance. And Rylance knows that he's at that point a traitor. And they've always suspected because the guy does work at the ISB. It's not like he was saying that he was just a partisan like them. But he knows that he's going to be a traitor. And it's interesting because now that positive reinforcement is gone. Because the head of the outfit hates Syril. And Syril is confused about what to do about it and is kind of seeming to look for his place as the chaos is erupting around him. So what could you tell us about that with Rylance kind of outing him right then and there, knowing that he's a terrible person and I think he says a line something like, "What kind of being are you?"
Well, I think that goes to Syril's heart. I think when people who go through one emotional trauma, I think that it opens them up to other emotional trauma. I think that with the scene you just had with Dedra, I think he's extraordinarily emotionally vulnerable. I think when Rylance says that to him, it just drops him down 50 more floors on the elevator falling. I think he's looking around trying to figure out. And I always thought it was very ironic and interesting that it's that moment that he gets the retribution comes. At the moment where he's probably maybe even having some sort of awakening. It was really like, who knows? Maybe if Syril lived and ran into Rylance afterward and was looking at the bodies like after Kent State, he might have gone like, wow, I really get it. I want to be with you. But he doesn't get the chance because this is now, the Force has stepped in. You're going to pay the price now. It might not have been what you thought was the opportune time. I was very intrigued as we were going through it, going, God, so why? He's going to be killed right when he's sort of waking up a little bit here. I always imagined, where would he be if he hadn't been killed? And I sort of thought that he might have become a rebel. That was my thought,
It seems like he's going that way. Like he could have repented, but of course, the one thing that stops him from becoming a rebel is that you complete his character goal of finding Cassian, which he's wanted to do since season 1. And of course, you guys had your fun with it because they walk past each other for a moment earlier and are completely unaware of each other. But he finds him and they have their fight.
Yeah.
And it shows us a few things, like this corporate cop kind of hold his own in a fight.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of not. That's kind of surprising. Like you wonder what kind of training he's had in this year or if the Empire gave him any training before he went to the planet. But also what's interesting is Cassian just looks at him when he's dead to in his sights and just exasperately says, "Who are you?" At that point, Syril kind of seems to recognize how insignificant he is in the greater scope of things, in which, his mark doesn't even know who he is. Talk about that moment, and then Rylance, rising up and shooting Syril right at the right exact moment to save Cassian's life.
When he spies Cassian, what we just talked about him being emotionally vulnerable and how maybe he could wake up. I think when he sees Cassian, it's this primal, animalistic, this was my goal. This is what I was going for. And as we were working on it, I was thinking that he might have been imagining at that moment, if I get this guy, Dedra is going to be proud of me. And this was the guy this was to be a really big thing. And I thought maybe this was going to be a reward for Dedra. Because it's such a shift all of a sudden from like, wow, I'm kind of like upset with what they put me through. And maybe what's going on in Gorman is wrong to now I'm just going to fucking kill this guy. I just thought it became an instinctual thing. In terms of fighting, I was not a part of the choreography, but I liked the way they did it.
Was Rylance always killing him?
No, actually not. I think there was definitely a time we imagined that Cassian was going to kill him. But Tony definitely steered it in a place that he felt was better, and I think it makes total sense. But in a fight, sometimes experience wins the day, but other times rage. Syril's a man on fire at that point. He's blowing himself up emotionally. People who are emotionally charged, try to stop them, no matter what your experience is. It's impossible, and I think he's got that energy with him.
Well, and they make mistakes, which is what he did, which is what gave Rylance a shot. I mean, earlier even, he knocks Cassian when he had Dedra in his sights. So it's he saved Dedra again, which is contrary to, he must have had a lot of emotions going through of should he have just saved her, knowing what he knows. So it's very interesting. Now, planning out what was to happen, just like the big, Ferrex march, you have this kind of lead up to it. And you see this completely green group of Imperial guards brought out to the middle of the square. All the barricades are taken away. Yeah, so that specifically this inexperienced group of guards is going to end up in some sort of a scuffle. And, they're going to make it look like the protesters started it. Even in that case, they didn't exactly, because there was snipers set up. Talk about mapping that out. And you had a lot going on there. So I'm just curious about figuring out what started it and then the complete just massacre of these civilians, which we know it had been leading up to the Gorman massacre because it's in the lore, but we'd never seen it.
We knew in the writer's room as we were starting to go through it, even before the blocks were assigned, that squad, they were dead. They were dead the moment they showed up on Gorman. And we knew we were going to slaughter them. And I think I had fun when I was writing it as the squad started to realize that something was amiss and that this was not operationally well thought out. And they're out in the middle of nowhere, and it's just not. And then obviously they had no clue that the sniper was going to start this whole thing. But they're stuck out in the middle of this incredibly, upset crowd. The thing I was most interested in was where Syril's choreography, Cassian's choreography, and that squad. I was very interested in that squad, and I was also, you're also funneling in Dedra's observations of it as she's watching it, what she's seen and what she's not seen. It's fun to write a scene where you got so many things to cut to. You can cut to Rylance, you can cut to Cassian, you can cut to Syril, you can cut to Dedra, you can cut to the guys in the unit. I mean, the hardest kind of writing is three people sitting at a table and you're not going anywhere. Then it's like, I got nowhere to go. But this kind of writing is like, oh, that's sort of, I'm going to move over here now. I'm going to move over here now. And then, that was my pass. Tony takes his pass and refines it and makes it better. Johnny then cuts it, whoever the editor was on that block, I forget. But a lot of hands come in to do the timing. But that's how you build suspense. It's that pinballing back and forth. When you have different things you can pinball to, you can really build suspense. That's what you want. It's critically important.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine. This is our 13th year, and we couldn't have done it without you. If you've never read us before, you could read our free issue on a desktop or laptop over at backstory.net or via our iPad app, Backstory. And folks, if you like what you see, and I'm sure that you will, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription. There's a lot to read there. We have a blog that's free, and of course, we have our entire archive for subscribers as well. And of course, we always update each of our current issues with new articles, so there's a lot for you to explore. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could see all these Zoomcasts. That's right, you could see Dan and I chatting about today's episode. It would really mean a lot to me to have you show your support for independent entertainment journalism. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our interview with screenwriter Dan Gilroy as we continue discussing Andor Season 2, Episodes 7 through 9, which you could watch right now on Disney+. Well, speaking of people being expendable like those Imperial troops, I think Dedra is starting to realize that she's expendable in a way too, because I believe his name is Captain Jada. Is that the name who comes in? Yeah. And Captain Jada comes in, and at one point he says to Dedra in your episodes, "You're the finger, I'm the trigger." Kind of like showing her the command, but like letting her know that tactically he still has control of the situation. It's no longer entirely her operation. And you could see her beginning to wonder, like, oh gosh, what have I gotten myself into? So that was kind of interesting as well. Well,
that's the first moment that Dedra is funny, because some people think Dedra is heartless and utterly amoral and will never see the light. I always thought when she realized what was going on, there was great hesitation. And actually, she said at one point earlier on, like, I don't want this assignment. When it first was given to her, she realized what it was. I think she sensed where it was going. But the difference between the commander, Jedha, and hers, she's the political arm. She's the bureaucratic arm. But as in any war, you'll have somebody's representing the political arm, but then the military people come in and go, I am in charge here. And
Right.
I'm the one who's going to kill people. And now you are sitting in the back and you're going to watch me kill people. I will, I don't know if she sees herself as vulnerable at that point. I think she realizes that I'm part of a killing machine. And whatever I was concerned about early on when I got to assignment is literally now taking place. And I think there is reticence. Would it have led to her ever questioning what she's doing? No, it doesn't. She makes a deal and she goes with it. She steals herself over. But yeah, he's the military component that you always find in any conflict where authority is exerting itself and military people take over. That's it.
We had been waiting to see when K2SO is going to enter the picture. And obviously we had seen, a droid that looked like him in season 1, but it wasn't the person, the droid that's arresting Cassian. I'm curious what the rules are here because blasters don't really work on these droids. Sometimes, right? Sometimes they do.
That little droid going around before he stole the TIE fighter. That was he got blasted that one. That stopped.
Right. And obviously stormtroopers in Rogue One, shoot K2SO pretty harshly. So I mean, like, it's interesting to see what equipment is working against the droids and what isn't. They're very brutal. They're killing a lot of people. And, they just slam a vehicle into it and take it. When did that idea come about? And what were some of the other ways you thought about introducing K2SO?
In the writer's room, we had actually a different concept of introducing. We actually thought that K2 was so important we were going to introduce him almost on an episode by himself. Actually, we tried it. I actually wrote an episode where K2 was introduced. Cassian needed to get back to Yavin. It was getting more difficult to get into Yavin because they were tightening the shipping lanes. And he had to hitch a ride on a rebel sort of favored freighter. We had a whole episode that we tried where Cassian's on the freighter and some other things. And then K2 comes aboard to do a search and it becomes this sort of nightmarish, almost alien sort of like thing. It was a very cool episode. It didn't work. It was too different from the other episodes. It was a standalone. It was wildly expensive. So it became, Tony called up and said, dude, that episode's not going to work. It's like for these reasons. And I said, yeah, I totally understand that. I think I had a sense maybe it wasn't going to work while we were talking about it. He started then to explore. He would call me up and go, what do you if we tried this? And he was the one who came up with the idea of the way it is now at Gorman with getting hit by the vehicle and bringing it on. In terms of the mechanics, it's a pretty big vehicle, K2s are not immortal. We always knew that when it woke up, there was going to be a moment of, oh my God, like, is it going to kill us all? And that's the birth of the funny K2. That was the birth of the weird, non sequitur, odd K2, which we all love.
It was great. I'm curious just briefly, I don't want to spend too long on this because I still want to get to Senator Mothma. There's these things in the background about Holo News.
Yeah.
And we see Holo News coverage documenting exactly the wrong thing. They're saying things like on the news after Gorman, they're saying like, what is the cost of security after, our Imperial martyrs who are now heroes, what is the price to pay? Like they've totally spun it. That's what state-run media does. Was there ever more that you guys plotted out of what was going on Holo News? Because I know in the lore, in the canon, there's something about it being bought out and kind of being turned to be Imperial. I'm just curious if there was more to it or if it was just like a little trope you wanted to throw in just to show how the state apparatus works.
We knew, and Tony was an advocate and the driver, we knew you wanted to use that very sparingly. We knew that could be kitschy if you weren't careful. And I think the point that you just picked up comes through pretty clearly that authoritative news sources can't be trusted. I did advocate that I thought Skulden would own the station. I thought Skulden would own the station. I thought when Mon is making the speech in the Senate, I was televised. I advocated strongly. I might have written it. I advocated for a scene in which Skulden gets a call like, why aren't you stopping this? And he doesn't stop it. And I was sort of imagining that Skulden sort of went along with it. That was the only thing that we tried, but didn't make it, and probably legitimately so. I thought Skulden owned the station.
I mean, I want to talk about Mothma. We learned that the senator from Gorman has been taken away, and they literally say the words, no warrant, no charges. That means no due process. You wrote this in 2022, I think fall of 22. Is that right?
That's probably right, yeah.
And it's just amazing because, just within the last 5 days, a Judge Dugan in Wisconsin, has been arrested with absolutely no due process.
Right.
As we are seeing some authoritarianism creep in right here in the United States. A lot of it on crazy levels. What kind of goes through your mind when you're seeing some of the kind of fascist moves that you were plotting out for this entertaining TV show that was hearkening harking back to the rise of authoritarianism through Nazism happened here in the United States. It's kind of heavy, man. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we were always thinking, because there were Star Wars people in the room, we were dealing with 6,000 years of Star Wars history. We're also dealing with what we know about human history. So I think Tony, Bo, and I, and Tom, were all certainly aware of the rise of Hitler and the rise of Stalin. Tony's always been very fascinated with Stalin, the rise of Mao. There were things happening in 22 and a little before in Hong Kong where, a very vibrant free speech movement had been completely, crushed and bulldozed. We were thinking that history just repeats itself in many places and in many times. This is a cycle. Somebody contains power. What are the first things you do? You control the news. You control people dissent. And we wanted to show how it happens, what the mechanics. Tony's always wanted to show the granular nuts and bolts reality of how one forms a rebellion. I was very interested actually in Steven Soderbergh's, which really people don't talk about too much, his 2 movies about Che. It was very interesting because he was dealing with that sort of similar thing, how this starts, how a small idea starts to build on a granular level. So we were very interested in that. The fact that it's happening now is a strange confluence that was, I don't think, was in any way, planned for. I'd like to think that the show will be relevant now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now, if somebody actually is thinking about fighting authority or something that they perceive to be wrong, and they get some value out of the show as to how one might organize to fight something that they feel is imperious and wrong. I think, look, Lucas started it. That was about the Vietnam War. I mean, that was about the post-Vietnam War. So it's always been in the DNA of the show. I think if you stay close to that fire, it's powerful for the show and it's powerful for the people watching it, because I don't think there's been any period in history where people haven't felt like, we got to watch out. There's things going on out there in a neighboring country, a neighboring continent, our own country. We got to watch out for this. It resonates. That's why you watch the reaction at the end of Rogue One. But there's one girl who's really watching. She's sobbing. She's going, oh my God. And you're like, what's driving that? And I think because internally we all have this sense of right and wrong, and we just don't like to see wrong triumph. So Star Wars gives you the template for right to win. And it's a powerful thing because right loses every minute of every day somewhere, and people are fighting it somewhere. So it's relevant all the time.
Let's talk about the escape plan of Mon Mothma.
Yeah.
And you wrote a great series of sequences in which it really was like a Le Carre novel, in which, in the course of a very short amount of time, Mon Mothma has found out that she cannot trust her assistant. She already knows she can't trust her driver. She fires her assistant, who was an important part of her life. Yeah. And basically, Luthen tells her whatever Bail Organa, her most trusted ally next to Luthen, tells her she can't listen to, and that Luthen is going to send someone for her. And, she has that paranoia. Is Luthen sending someone to kill her, like the way that they dispatched with her childhood friend? There's so many different things that are going on, and you have a great sequence in which she starts this speech. And Tony and I talked about it just briefly, but now we can talk about it full here, in which you are correcting the canon, in which, in the animated series Rebels, there's a speech Mon Mothma gives on the Ghost, on the ship.
Yeah.
But here you're showing the part that we haven't seen, which is from the Senate. State TV is rushing while the escape is going on to also cut the feed while she's giving the speech even.
Yeah, that was in the writer's room. I wrote that in my draft. Tony polished it up and changed some of the choreography because he had to, because of the locations and other stuff. But I started that. I took too long on that episode too. I was late on that episode because I just was going like, oh my God, Mon Mothma is starting this day and everything is just going to collapse around her. Everything is just going to collapse. And I just like the moment that Luthen pulls her aside and goes, your plan is gone. And she's moments from going up, and she's already, part of her's got to be going like, do I even want to get up? Oh my God, I'm going to lose everything. And will I even make it out alive? It's just, and I talked to Genevieve at the cast party the other night, and we were talking about it, and we were just going like the laundry list of things that she's dealing with, and that she has to get up in front of the Senate and make the most powerful speech. And knowing that after that, if she escapes, and she does escape, then she's going to get on the Ghost and give the galactic call to arms. It was a blast. It reminded me of Aldani a little bit, because there was a lot. It was one of those things where you really could go back and forth. I can't tell you how much fun it is to write something that's got a kinetic component like that, where you're going like building up here and then you're going over here and you're building up here. Everything's feeding off everything else. Everything raises the bar. It was the classic structure of all, suspense. But in terms of Mon, she very bravely and very selflessly sacrifices her entire life and being to do the right thing, when obviously it's been shown that nobody else in that political body will do it. That political body, as we know, had a great democratic history. It seems to have evaporated rather quickly, and she's the only one standing to speak. That is the light that is going to inspire other people. And I've always believed in that. I deeply believe there are things worth dying for. There are people out there I know, I talk to, who don't believe there's very few things worth dying for. I believe there's many things worth dying for. And certainly what she's talking about might be number one.
You actually made us lean forward. Kind of the trick of this for you and Tony is that rather than just seeing her speech, there's action going on all around it, of Cassian trying to get in, of Bale's Confederate agent interfering, and killing the other agent that was there to protect her. And we don't get to see her speech that much. You don't have like this great Senate moment. You have the start of it, but it's like it's kind of on TVs in the background and on the loudspeaker and in earpieces. And it was really fascinating. Like when did you realize that you wanted to cut it up rather than stay there? Or does it go back to just the basics of suspense, in which it can't be two events happening at once? You had to thread them completely together so that they are of the same plot.
Basis of suspense, and also hoping that the pieces that you did hear were relevant enough and powerful enough that they would inspire somebody you'd understand how brave it was that she was saying. And also knowing that she was going to get on the Ghost and give a galactic call to arms.
Right.
There's an overlap in terms of what she's saying. The Senate, she's condemning the people in the Senate of cowardice. And even worse than that, of treason. Ultimately, by not acting.
And she's mentioning a call of genocide. She's mentioning what's happened to the Gorman senator who's been disappeared. And by the way, she directly calls out the emperor as well in the Senate.
Yeah, she does. And so it's extraordinarily brave. And then on the Ghost ship, it's more, we will fight them on the beaches. We will fight them here. We'll fight them there. We're not going to stop fighting. It's right. Winston Churchill. So I think we were a little concerned that you didn't want to have reams of speech, because the audience understands what's at stake. You don't have to tell them. They know at this point, if you've watched the show, what it is she's saying. I like the fact that it came in elliptically. I like the fact that it had a much more real feel to it, which was great. And I think Genevieve felt the same way because I spoke to her about it. I think she feels that the message very clearly got through in the pieces that you saw.
Absolutely. I'm curious if there were any scenes that you had in your original scripts that were either never filmed for season 2 or just were cut like somewhere in the editing process. Because it's always interesting to hear about stuff that seemed good at the time, but was either, like you said earlier, too expensive. You had to go back to the drawing board, stuff like that.
I had a beat in my first draft where when after she fled the Senate and got away, she went back to Chandrila because she wanted to tell her daughter why she had done what she had done. And I had a scene where she went back. The house where you saw the wedding, it's now empty, and the drapes are billowing, and like it's all empty. And she goes upstairs to look, and Perrin is there. And she had this really heavy conversation with Perrin as to what was how he was going to raise the daughter and what the cost of this was going to be. And then she and Cassian sort of wended their way to the Ghost ship. There was a couple of beats in between there. So I had a passage of time that was sort of like accounted for in a different way. But the running time was too long. It was totally wrong. It didn't work. This was better, ultimately. But that was written and not put in. That was in the writer's room. We had that in the writer's room.
That's fascinating. Was there ever a time in your episode where she did end up on the Ghost ship doing the rest of that speech? Were you ever going to recreate it, or were you going to leave it only for Rebels in the animated show?
We knew that was very important. There were Star Wars people in the room. They were saying, and we agreed that from a canon standpoint, we could not mess too much with that speech because it would have been so locked in.
Oh, I just mean recreate it. Like, were you ever going to recreate it in live action?
We talked about it. We did talk about it. And there was an issue about whether the canon could be broken, and not do it that way. That was definitely a topic. As a matter of fact, of all the things that were discussed about canon, that speech and how accurate it had to be or not be was probably the thing we spent the most on with the Star Wars people. There was no conflict. We were ready to go with whatever they said, because you can make it work either way.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, is there anything else you want to tell us that once Tony has these scripts and once he's rewriting them, I'm curious if he ever came back to you and said, hey, page 67 of your third script, I got to talk to you. This scene, I can't figure out. I need something else. Like, did he ever have you rewrite anything?
He had me rewrite a couple. Definitely. He sent me back on probably every script I had and had me do a pass to get it where he wanted. And then certainly then he would take his pass. He occasionally would call me while he was doing his pass, run something by me, a question. And I would say, well, this is what I was thinking when I did that. He did call up after Bix leaves. It was that she left this message going, so you think that was the best way to go and not have this other thing? And I was going, yeah. And we were talking it through. I remember that. But he would not call me tremendous amounts. See, once I'd written them, gotten his notes and did his pass, he would call me probably each episode, maybe 2 or 3 times. And then once in a while, he would call me about another episode that he was changing and go, what do you think about if, because he knew he knew that I'd been in the room. Maybe Tom or Bo were not available. They probably weren't. They were doing something else. And he goes, dude, what do you think? You were in the room. What do you think we should do about this?
Do you remember any of those moments, what he was calling about, other than the message? Any stuff with the Force healer, any things with...
Yeah, probably something about the Force healer. Something in Bo's episode that was more mechanical. You think somebody could kill this person and still do this and that? Because these were arguments that we'd had in the writer's room. Why did we settle on that? Do you remember? I looked through my notes and yeah, we settled on that. I can't remember exactly. I do remember definitely about when Bix left, the choreography of how he found out and where that went afterward. Tony worked very collaboratively with us once he had the drafts in the writer's room, and certainly that. But once he was alone, once you get in the zone with the characters and the story, you can sort of do it on your own. And he was doing it on his own, you know. You sort of know the answers to these things because he knew the answers to these things because he could write reams of dialogue for any of these characters. Right now, if you sat down and said, give me an argument between Syril and Dedra, I'm telling you right now, in 15 minutes, he could give you something you could shoot because he knows it. So when you're following the story, and also tonally, he so understands the tone of it that if he hit a dilemma, I would say probably 90% of the time, he probably didn't need to call anybody. He was going like, oh, I know tonally what the decision is here. Jesse Armstrong who wrote Succession, right? I was reading about Succession because I was fascinated. I still love the show so much. And he was talking about in the writer's room, and we had rules, and he was talking about the rules. And like, we always asked ourselves, what's the worst thing we can make happen to these characters? And the rules we had is the characters will never learn anything from what they've been through. They'll do the right thing for the wrong reasons and the wrong thing for the right reasons. Yeah, in Succession, so you can just see like when Jesse Armstrong would have a dilemma, he had some rules and he'd go like, well, it's going to be the worst thing that can happen and they're not going to grow from it and they're going to do it for the wrong reason. So I'm going with option number 2. So you sort of, once you understand how the shows work or what it is you're working with, you start to, I think Tony and probably most writers, they can start to answer these dilemma questions because there are rules that follow it. There's certain rules in Andor that we're never going to break, you know? We're never going to choose the first 3 options. We're going to go for the 4th option, you know? Whatever the first 3 things you think it's going to be the 4th one. It's going to be granular and character driven instead of plot driven, you know? People aren't going to be moved around like chess pieces. They're going to sort of move themselves. I mean, it's like Tony would call me. I think I saw an interview where you said like I would come in and would do a drive-by. That's probably a really accurate way to describe it.
That makes sense.
My brother was there like every freaking day doing everything with him. So Johnny was much more present in that moment.
You know, I'm curious. It was great to see Melshi introduced and also to see the heroism of Will refusing to leave without Drina. Talk about those 2 characters kind of still doing their heroics, but really on the sidelines. And just the decision to bring in Melshi.
Melshi is representative of a group of subordinate characters, and Will falls in that category as well. They grow. They've become, I remember telling you, like when we were talking about bringing them back, we were going, well, where are they? They've become bigger themselves. They've become different themselves. They're different than they were when we first met them. Will is far different and Melshi's far different. And so I think when we brought them back, it was just, you got to see where they are in their journey, how they're acting, which is different from how we saw them when we first met them. They've grown like everybody else. They've become forces to be reckoned with in their own way.
Absolutely.
You know, they really have. It's very interesting.
What was your toughest scene? What was the scene from these 3 episodes that you remember really sweating and going back to over and over?
Mon's speech.
Yeah? Okay.
Mon's speech, because I really was trying to imagine. That Senate is big. I kept going back, how many senators are there? Like 3,000 or something? The whole galaxy is there. And I kept thinking, she knows she's signing her death warrant potentially. She knows everything is horrible about to happen. And what would you say? What would you say about authority? What would you say about democracy? What would you say about cowardice? What would you say about backbone? This is such an interesting thing. It's really what the show is really about. When you're asking people to join the rebellion, you're asking people, and that's why I love that first scene when he's stealing the fighter and the girl is talking about, tell me something, and he says, you're returning home. That will resonate with certain people. And certain people their eyes will glaze over and go, what are you talking about? You're talking about dying for this. It's not worth it. I want to go home tonight. I just kept agonizing over what she was talking about because I wanted her to, because there's going to be many people watching the show who are going to go like, I would never risk my life and my family. I mean, me, I can risk, but they're going to kill my daughter and my wife and my dog. And I would never do that. I wanted what she said to pierce that veil. I wanted people at home watching it to go like, wow. And I think Tony pierced the veil on what Cassian says to the woman at the beginning of the first season when she's stealing. Tell me something that will carry me through this. You're going back home. You're returning to yourself. Let that override your fear. I wanted her to poke through that. So I was agonizing over what she was saying. I was just going, oh my God, I just really wanted to respect the moment of the character. The other stuff's mechanical and wonderful and coming up with great dialogue. It's all fun, but that had a real resonance for me. I was going like, you really got to like be true to this character.
Yeah.
She said sacrificing so much at that moment.
No small feat there writing that speech, and congrats, because you did a great job of it. What's next? What could you tell us about that you're working on next?
Well, yesterday they announced, finally, I didn't know they were going to announce it. I'm doing the reboot of Miami Vice with Joe Kosinski, and Dylan Clark is producing it. We're getting some good traction on it, and I wouldn't be surprised if something good happened there. And
I'm a longtime fan of the entire series, so I can't wait for that.
Sonny and Chubb, Sonny Crockett and Tubbs.
Absolutely.
They're from Star Wars to Miami, 1985.
They're the best. Bring back Eric Bogosian's character. There's got to be a way we could bring him back. I think he gets
a couple of great actors that broke on that show. Glenn Fry from the Eagles, he was
absolutely.
Yeah, I got an independent film right now that we're putting together with Nicholas Hoult and Julia Garner, and we're going to hopefully do that in the fall.
Does it have a title?
Mr. Fix-It. And I'm just busy, just working away,
That is fantastic. I absolutely love the work that you did on Andor seasons 1 and 2, and I cannot wait to see what you do next. So, Dan, thanks so much for your time today.
I love hanging with you. I love talking about what we're talking about, and I hope people enjoy the show because we had a lot of fun and put a lot into it.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to screenwriter Dan Gilroy for being so generous with his time and coming down to chat about Andor Season 2, Episodes 7 through 9, which you could watch right now on Disney+. And folks, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. It is our 13th year, and we couldn't have done it without you. If you've never read us, you could test drive us by reading our free issue. And if you like what you see, and I'm sure that you will, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription. You could also explore our free blog at backstory.net. And the good news is, whenever we publish a new issue, we keep adding new articles to it because we're a digital magazine. We could do that. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could see all these Zoomcasts. It would really mean a lot to me to have you show your support for independent entertainment journalism. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2025. All rights reserved. And folks, if you want to reach out to me online, I'm an easy guy to find. You could find me on Blue Sky as Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag, or you could find me on Twitter as Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag, or you could find me on Instagram as Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. Do you see a trend here? Well, there is one. And yes, I even have a Facebook fan page, which is another great way to say hi. You could also send me an email over at backstoryletters@gmail.com, and I will do my darndest to respond to you. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.